lovely to be here at the festival. It's my 4th year in a row, and thank you, Patrick Cotter and the International Short Story Festival for inviting me here tonight to interview two writers, both write in many different forms. First up is Carlo Gébler, who was born in Dublin, now lives up north in Enniskillen. I'll be popping around to see you.
It's all right, looking forward to it.
He's actually got a novel out this week. I was just
next week.
Next, the 17th or 16th?
Yeah,
something like that. So, so that's coming out to look forward to. And he's written for the theatre and for the radio, an award-winning documentary maker as well.
There's no end to my talent.
Nothing he can't do. I don't think I like him, actually. No. But and tonight we're going to be talking about his short story collection, The Wing Orderly's Tales. We also have Alannah Hopkin, who is also multi-talented. She was a journalist, travel writer, reviewer, and has 2 novels. She's actually 3 books out in print at the moment. One is a non-fiction book about West Cork, and her collection of short stories, which is a collection of that's a mixture of travel writing and stories. And she's going to be reading from that tonight. In fact, she's going to read the title story for us. So if you give her a little round of applause, I'm sure she'll come up and start reading for you.
Thanks very much. The title story of The Dogs of Inishere. She was told in Rossaville, while she waited for the ferry, that the islanders are great dog lovers. Nothing pleases them more than to be given a puppy to take home. The ferry, the Dun Angus, had a crew of 2. It could have carried about 40 passengers, but there were only a dozen or so on board and a clump of cardboard boxes. When they were close enough to the islands to distinguish between Inishmore, away on the starboard beam, Inishmaan, the middle island, dead ahead, and Inishere, the smaller island, just visible to port, the engine broke down. The mate disappeared down a hatch. The captain joined him, and without way, they drifted beam ends onto the Atlantic swell, as diesel fumes swept up on deck and lingered there in spite of the breeze. A solemn-looking bearded man sitting opposite her stared anxiously back at the Connemara coast. "I should have stayed with Delaney," he said, looking straight at her. She pretended she hadn't heard. 10 minutes later, the captain re-emerged, sweaty forehead, greasy forearms, and gave a long, exasperated explanation in Irish to a male passenger, concluding with the words, "Fecking diesel." The captain pointed towards a house that did bed and breakfast as they landed at the pier. An old man sat in the garden twisting sally rods into small baskets. When he greeted another person after her, she turned around to see that the bearded man who should have stayed with Delaney had followed her up. "We made it," he said. "Is this your first time on the island?" "Yes." "Inishere is different," he said. "So I've noticed. I can't get over all the grey stone. Grey stone and bleached out grass. No colours at all. Even the sky is a paler blue." "Are you a painter?" "I'm a photographer." A small English sheepdog type, grey and white and in need of grooming, lay on the doormat. He opened one milky eye, then grunted and turned over. Katie reached across and turned the latchkey, opening the door as Mrs. Flaherty came into the hall. "Grand, eh? The skipper on the ferry said you'd have rooms. A double, is it? 2 singles? We're both from the ferry. The captain sent us over. That would be Miho, my nephew. He's very good to me." Mairead Flaherty stood in her front garden and pointed to a house with a wooden sign on its side. "Restaurant." A small stone-walled field between the Flaherty's house and the restaurant was occupied by an abandoned blue Ford Cortina. The field could have held 2 at a pinch, it was that small. An undernourished black and white bitch with something of a King Charles Spaniel about her was sniffing around the rusting car. The field was a wildflower meadow. Harebells, scabious, purple clover, oxeye daisies, saxifrage and bloody cranesbill grew among the tall grasses. An L-shaped ground floor room had been furnished with simple tables and chairs. There were no curtains and the walls were plain, apart from a framed certificate from the Western Health Board saying that the establishment was licensed as a limited restaurant. A shy young girl with a notepad came up to her. "Is the soup homemade?" "No, it's from a packet." Only one other table was occupied. They were 4 women in their mid-20s, drably turned out. The words chapel and sister occurred frequently in their conversation. She walked from the restaurant back to the pier and onto the beach. It took about 4 minutes. The quiet was strange to her after the city. Cries from the bathers on the strand and the murmurs from people gossiping on the pier sounded eerie against the silence. A short-legged terrier and a miniature mainly dachshund were hanging around on the pier. Neither they nor any of the other dogs on the island ever barked. She left them staring silently out to sea and walked barefoot onto the sand. She watched as the Dublin ferry, a small motorboat with a very loud engine, made its way across to the pier. The 4 women from the restaurant were sitting in a cove with their backs to the rocks, each reading a paperback. As she stared towards the mainland, a speck appeared in the sky on the side of the island. A Land Rover suddenly roared up and down the landing strip, scattering the donkeys that grazed there. The plane came in so low that she could watch the anxious faces of the passengers. On her way back to the B&B between the pier and the thatched cottage, she met a medium-sized, short-haired mongrel. One pat on the head made him lie at her feet, grovelling in abject adoration, paws and nose stretched out on the ground. Then he rolled over and waved his legs in the air. He followed as she walked away, jumping up to lick her face, doggy breath warm on her cheeks, his long pink tongue hanging out of snapping Alsatian-like jaws. She changed from shorts into trousers, then went straight out again to the restaurant. The man who should have stayed with Delaney was leaving it. "Half an hour," he said. "They've forgotten to put the potatoes on." "Michael Madden." She shook his hand. "Katie Collins." "Shall we wait in the pub? I haven't found it yet." "There are 3, including the hotel. The nearest is Flaherty's." "Any relation to our B&B?" "I don't know. We can ask." There was a line of young men along the bar and a low murmur of voices, which died down as they went in and then resumed. Everybody looked at them curiously and then looked away again. She realized they had come in the back door that normally only locals used. A few tourists, easily identified by their smart casual clothes, were sitting at a table in the front window that looked out to the sea. She recognized a young couple and their small child who had got off the plane that afternoon. The bar had just been done up. There was a whiff of wood shavings and glue. A space was made for Michael at the counter. A young man with curly black hair and bright blue eyes repeated his order: a gin and tonic and a glass of Guinness. She took a seat on a wooden bench against the wall beside a small table. "They're not related to the B&B, Pyrrhus says, or not anymore," Michael said as he sat down. "They probably were long ago, Pyrrhus says, but nowadays nearly everyone in this part of the island is called Flaherty. Do you have the melodious Gaelic on you? Do you see me wearing a fáinne? You must be from Kerry," answering a question with a question. "What about you?" "I had years of it at school, but it doesn't seem to have left any mark at all." "You've been to Inishere before?" Many times, but long ago. I've been living abroad. This is my first summer at home in years. I came up to Galway to stay with Delaney, and I decided to take another look at the island. And what do you reckon? Well, this place has certainly changed. When I first knew it, Piers probably wasn't even born. I remember his father Thomas because he is the only publican ever to have refused me a drink. I wasn't drunk, not even noisy. I was just quietly sipping my gin and tonic up at the counter, and I asked for another. No, said Thomas Flaherty, you've had enough. And that was that. Another time I had to wait to be served while he finished the family rosary in the kitchen. He was in the wrong trade, they used to say. He should have been a bishop. She was trying to guess Michael's age as they watched a pale, elderly woman in dark glasses come up the front path. The woman stuck her head in the open door. She looked very worried. Has the last ferry left? They say the ferry went at 4:30, but we were told on the way over that it was going back at 6:30. She had a flat, unattractive American accent. Pierce and his contemporaries up at the bar exchanged bored glances. One man said something in Irish and another answered him in an interrogative tone. Pierce was polishing a glass. Is there another ferry to Dublin today? She was paler now, trembling slightly and biting her lip. Does anyone know if there's another Dublin ferry? They all looked at Pierce. I don't know the ferry times, he said, still polishing the glass. Ask them below at the pier. That was obviously where she had just come from. She turned and fled. The young men up at the bar broke out laughing and the conversation became bilingual. Why does she expect me to know the fecking ferry times, said Pierce. It was the Rossaville ferry left at 4:30, said another young man, as if anyone who didn't know that must be very stupid. The Dublin ferry goes at 7, doesn't it, Rory? Said one of the Irish speakers. It does not, said a tall, fat man. It goes at 7:30, and I have a ticket in my pocket. This remark caused great mirth among the locals. The male of the well-dressed young couple at the window joined in, speaking to the Dublin ferry ticket holder. We're flying back to Galway tomorrow. We got a special deal, a family ticket. The 3 of us fly for £38. The ferry would have cost £12 each. There's not much in it. We get subsidised fares. We can fly to Galway any time we like, boy. Any time we like. The same couple sat next to Michael and Katie in the limited restaurant. Katie liked Michael, who she decided was anything from 10 to 20 years older than her. He said he was an engineer. If you're an engineer, why didn't you offer to help when the boat broke down? I'm not that sort of engineer. I build bridges. The name of the smart couple's child was Lauren. No, Lauren, you can't eat your Twix until you've had your tea. Want it now? Want my Twix now? You can't have your Twix until you've finished your steak. Eat up now like a good girl. Want it now, Lauren? Wah! Want it now? The wife smiled ingratiatingly at Katie across the table. Katie looked away. The 4 young women were at the corner table again. Lauren's roaring forced them to raise their voices, and again Katie caught the word sister several times, and now theatre as well. She went for a walk with Michael afterwards, along narrow, high-walled paths. An old-timer in a Borneen sweater passed them, carrying a plastic bucket. He was on his way to milk the cow. Because the fields were so small, there was only room for 1 cow in each. The cows looked sulky and bad-tempered. Cows are herd animals, said Michael. They need company. About a mile from the restaurant, they saw the child Lauren on her own, pushing an empty baby buggy up a path. From the distance, she was invisible, hidden by the tall stone walls. On their way back to the B&B, they saw Lauren's young mother standing on a small hill, anxiously searching the horizon for her missing child. At the front door, they shook hands again. Michael asked if she would walk to the back of the island with him the next day. What's there? Rocks, sea, wildflowers? It's different from this side of the island. No sandy beach, no houses, no screaming kids. Let's hope. See you at breakfast. On Thursday afternoon, Piers Flaherty put the finishing touch to his redecoration. He installed a stereo radio and CD player. At 6 o'clock, he went off to train for the curragh races, leaving his brother behind the bar. Two young men were leaning on it heavily, propping each other up. It was too much for the blonde one. He slid to the floor and held onto the legs of a bar stool. The dark-haired man kept trying to sing. Today I sold the old brown cow for £2.10. The brother behind the bar turned the radio on, full blast, heavy metal, against which a voice was raised. Today I sold the old brown cow for £2.10. Dull day, said Pierce's brother quietly, as he handed Katie and Michael their drinks. If you're a photographer, where are your cameras? Michael asked. I'm on holiday. They were eating in the hotel, sharing a bottle of red wine. The waitress had put a candle on their table. What shall we do tomorrow? He asked. We? You enjoyed today, didn't you? Yes. Then why not tomorrow? You're right, why not? When Mairead served their breakfast next morning, Michael told her about yesterday in Flaherty's. Dull day can get a bit out of hand, all right, but we're glad to have our people back. Unemployment has been a great help to the island. If we have to choose between living on the dole in Dublin or Galway and living on the dole on the island, most of us will choose the island. It's a great place to bring up children. And do the children stay, Katie asked. Don't they want to leave as soon as they can? The best way to know if the island is for you is to leave it. I lived in Galway myself for long enough to get a degree in Irish studies, and then I came back. Most of the people you see here today have tried Galway or Dublin or Boston and come back, often with children of their own. That's what keeps our population steady. When she was back in the kitchen, they each quickly buttered 2 slices of soda bread and put them in their pockets for lunchtime on the back of the island. They had decided to move to Inishere that afternoon. As they set off for the back of the island, they noticed that the Dogs of Inishere had formed themselves into a pack. They were after the spaniel bitch. The sheepdog was followed by the groveler, his long pink tongue hanging from the side of his mouth, eyes straight ahead, fixed on the little bitch. Lagging behind, legs working as fast as they'd go, were the terrier and the little dachshund. Later that day, as Michael and Katie were carrying their bags from the B&B to the pier, they saw the terrier at the entrance to the Cortina field, stuck immobile to the spaniel. The sheepdog, the groveler, and the dachshund were watching patiently, waiting their turn. Thank you.
So this collection spans your 30-year career, doesn't it?
Yes, and I should have said that story actually dates from a visit to Inishere in 1986.
Right,
And
okay.
people who know Inishere know that because of the name of the ferry. It was the last year it was in use.
So how did you go about looking at 30 years of work and then choosing which pieces to include and which to leave out? What was that process like?
Do I need to use this?
I would.
Yes, okay. It was a question of making lists. and revisiting old stuff and being quite tough on saying, you know, well, this is okay, but this isn't. And I think the first list was of 12, and I then showed that and the stories to my agent, who very cleverly suggested dropping one of the stories because it was out of key with the others. But somehow they hung together in a funny way. I mean, there's no real
Were you
logic
looking
to it.
for themes or?
No, just stuff worth keeping after 30 years, stuff that I wanted to see
reshare.
in print, yes, that I thought stood up.
Because I mean, I don't know whether that's because you try to find a connection when you're reading short stories. You know, you sometimes, you find that in the first page of the second story there's a reference to, a car that was in that, and you're trying to, is that our minds trying to build a narrative with short stories and
No, it's not like that at all. It's more like, it could even be the collective stories by different people. They are that different, depending. And then there's the question of, I grew up in London and I moved back to Kinsale in 1982, so there's a mixture of London stories that I liked and wanted to keep. And as I was trying to put it together, I came across old stories that I had abandoned unfinished, and I had this streak of being able to finish stories. I don't know if that's ever happened to either of you, but suddenly stories that hadn't made sense or fallen into place came good. And that's very exciting, and that sends you on to the next one. And I think for me that was the coherence it had, that they were all finished in a way that perhaps they hadn't been for 20 odd years or not.
Because your collection is a linked collection, which, how did you, well, I know how you've done it, but I was wondering, for example, what's the difference between a linked collection and a novel?
It's shorter, and you can leave a lot out. So this is a collection of stories told in the voice of an orderly, the guy who cleans the toilets and buffs the wing in a prison. It's very, very difficult to write about prison because it's incredibly repetitive and boring, as well as, it's also occasionally extremely violent and unpleasant, but mostly it's boring. And that's a real obstacle. And it's also also incredibly confusing. The regime is confusing, there are people coming and going, it's a madhouse. What? Like this? Okay, I've got a project really. Yeah, find my inner Royal Shakespearean self. Right, I shall try. And what I decided to do was to have the character give you 12, in inverted commas, yarns. There is a connection, but I didn't have to deal with the seasons or chronology. I didn't have to deal with the passing of time, all those problems that you have with a novel. I could just have the good bits, i.e. bad bits, and dispense with all the rest. So path of least resistance, really.
Okay. So, because one of the things I noticed about your stories then, so I would ask you, is because there's quotes from authors in quite a lot of the stories, and so I thought, well, is that an organic thing then? Did you just go through stories and then find that this is something you do often? Or did you go and place that in stories then to make it seem more thematically linked?
No, that's the way I think.
So
I read so much, and my head's always full of words, and so the quotes come out kind of unsolicited.
But did you have to think a lot about the sequencing?
The order to put the story in, yes.
That's the key thing.
And what I didn't know, but I was told by my Jonathan Williams, you should always follow a third-person story with a first-person story.
Really?
Yeah.
You got that, everyone?
Yeah. New rule.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jonathan Williams says.
Remind me that later on. But
but apparently I'd done it all wrong in the first draft.
Right. Take Alannah.
I know.
So I'm guessing, are these your favourite authors? And you've got like Poe and Wilde and Austen, or do they just happen to be what you're reading at the time, regardless of whether you admire them or not?
No, Malcolm Lowry was I wrote my MA thesis on Malcolm McNamara's. I'm up to here with McNamara.
Yeah.
And it's like second nature.
Mm.
And Keats as well. There's a story about a schoolgirl trying to memorise the Ode to a Nightingale. And as I was writing the story, I did the same. And it was total immersion, and it was great fun.
So you can recite.
I did 5 stanzas.
Only 5?
Only 5, yeah. I gave up.
So at about 11:30 down at the hotel,
Down the pub, you'll belt out 5
My heart
stanzas.
aches. Yes.
I was interested. One of the quotes that you used in the book, actually, that was very interesting. Was one that says, "I believe." Well, actually, it's after a quote, and it was your response. Actually, to the quote, and you said, "I believe that the truth is made clear if one tells lies."
Mm.
And but even though you shouldn't call fiction lies. I believe in stories. You said. Could you just tell me a little bit more about that philosophy, that idea?
That was an argument I was having with a writer called B.S. Johnson. Just, in my head, in my room. And he, I think he was confusing writing fiction with self-expression, self-analysis, and it wasn't giving him what he wanted. And so he decided that telling fiction is telling lies. And that made me think he doesn't understand what fiction actually is, because it isn't telling lies. It's telling a story. It's using whatever is there to tell the story. Whereas telling lies is something you do in life. It's not something you do in writing.
So is it about telling the truth then?
The truth is contained in the story. So the story is not the same as telling lies. The story is a way of telling the truth. It actually all goes back to Plato and Aristotle, but it gets quite boring if you do it that way.
It's telling the truth without fact.
Yeah, yes. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick.
Yes.
I'm asking you a question later on, since you're so vocal tonight.
And it's also providing a pattern. So experience is so capricious and random and overwhelming. But you sort it into a pattern.
Yeah.
The pattern isn't. It's the blocks out of which the pattern is assembled are true. There's verisimilitude, but the pattern is not like life, because you've left a lot of boring stuff out. You whiz around in time, but it works because of its structure and its aesthetic loveliness and coherence.
And at the root of it is not the
not
difference between truth and lies.
No.
That's irrelevant. Someone else disagrees?
Sorry. We basically have to love the mind.
Just bring it up like this.
Janis Joplin style.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just channel your Janis.
In here tonight. And there's not even any alcohol.
No, there's no alcohol.
I mean, I always think that fiction has to be truer than reality.
Absolutely, yes.
Because things have happened to me in my life that if I wrote in a story, no one would believe. They just wouldn't believe that those events would happen in that sequence to any human being.
Yeah.
So you have to.
Don't you go around all the time saying you couldn't make it up?
Yeah.
But in the story which I'm going to read, there's a lie in it, because the true event. There was one true thing that people said to me. That's absolute bollocks. You couldn't. I don't believe you. So I had to change it in order to get them to believe the story to an untruth.
Yes.
And there'll be a little test to see if you can spot it.
There'll be a free drink.
Yeah, if you win. The opportunity to buy us a free drink, I think.
But this sounds like a good time for us to have you read. But just before you do, just to give a little bit of context for everyone about this collection. It's fiction. But it comes from your time, I think 25 years you spent creative writing, teaching in prisons. And you described it as your university. And but perhaps if you just give a little bit of context for the collection before you read your story, would you mind? Just letting people.
Yes, so it's about a character called Chalky, who is the guy who cleans. He's done many sentences. He's extremely violent. He's done several years for domestic violence against his wife. his prison card in the security department, his note, where they note down his offences and so on, does not take visits, which means, the wife's got a barring order and doesn't bring the kids in. But when I worked in the prison, I could go anywhere I wanted, and sometimes I would have to go into the security department and look up these forms, these cards, which had the prisoner's details, and they made for melancholy reading.
Would you like to read for us now yourself? Thanks very much. Can you give him a little applause?
Right. Thanks. The story's called Christopher Jenkins. I was buffing the floor in the circle with the polisher when they first brought him onto the wing. This was early December. He'd flat feet and long lank hair and a goatee and buck teeth and a paunch and thick glasses. I clocked him for a kiddie fiddler straight away. He had to be. You can tell, believe me. Kiddie fiddlers look like kiddie fiddlers. His name was Christopher Jenkins. He was assigned a cell on F wing, my wing, top end, near the class office, that's where the officers sit, and he opted for permanent lockup. Sensible, no aggro. Nobody saw him for weeks. I don't think he even got out. I don't think he even got the Christmas dinner. The screws forgot to bring it to him. Not that anybody cared. He was a root, that's sort of Ulster slang for a paedophile. Why should he be fed? Then, one day, he was gone. They put him on another wing, in another block, with his own kind, the vulnerable prisoners wing. He'd only been here until a space came up over there. Then the holidays ended. What a relief. Holidays just meant more time locked in our cells. Normal regime resumed in early January. And on the first Thursday afternoon of the new year, I slipped downstairs to the recreation hall. The place was full of prisoners waiting to be called to the workshops or education or visits. I felt great. Whoopee! I couldn't wait to get out of the block and over to education. Classes were called. The grill opened. I went through to the circle with all the ones going there, got patted down, and then was brought over by the escort screw to education. A caged area with doors at the back was packed with cons waiting to be called to class, smoking, gossiping, exchanging news, doing what cons do. And that was where I saw him again, standing by himself, clutching a file of paper and a couple of biros, looking completely fucking clueless. Christopher Jenkins. So he was going to education, the same as I was. I hoped he wasn't going to be in my class. I don't like roots because of what they have done, and I don't like them because of what they attract. Clowns who want to batter them to make a reputation for themselves. That, in turn, makes the powers that be go mental, and then they bring the riot screws, and the peelers come in, and then everybody ends up having a really bad fucking time. Even though I don't believe, I said a silent prayer while I waited. Please, God, not in my creative writing class, I said. But did he listen? Did he fuck? Classes were called, the screws opened the doors, we all filed in. I followed him through the doors, up the stairs. I kept my distance from Christopher Jenkins because, well, it wouldn't do to be seen walking beside a dirty route. Other cons would think we'd something in common if they saw that, or worse, that we were mates. We got to the first floor, I watched him go down the corridor and into my classroom. Oh, fuck. I went in and there he was, sat in the corner again, away from all the others. Hello, Chalky. This was Beefy, armed robber, doing 8. I sat beside him. He wasn't in my block, so I only saw him in class. Good Christmas, he asked. It's jail. And I thought it was just a bad dream, he said. The door opened. 12 men in the class fell quiet as she came in, wearing a skirt that swished, and perfume, and earrings. our teacher, a woman with a woman's voice, and nice hands, and nail varnish. The 13th man was Christopher Jenkins, and he didn't fall quiet because he had been silent all along. Nobody talks to a root. Good break? Oh, yes, Veronica, 12 cons eagerly replied. The 13th again said nothing. And who are you? She said to him in the corner who hadn't spoken. Christopher Jenkins opened his mouth, but the only noise that came out was his tongue slapping about inside against his cheeks. Christ. A root with a stammer in my favourite class, the one that gave me 2 hours weekly with my lovely Veronica. His name's Christopher Jenkins, I said. Thank you, Jordan, she said. Root lover, came the quiet words. Veronica didn't hear. It was Alan, who sat on my left, block 2, drug dealer, doing 6, highly unpopular. His measures were always slightly under. Before Christmas, I'd heard, some lads in his block gave him a tanking in the yard because they never got quite what they paid for. It hadn't done him any good. He was still the same obnoxious cunt. What was it he said? Me? A root lover? Me? I now imagined what I would say to him. Alan, mate, I'm doing 12 fucking years. Assault occasioning actual bodily harm. On a peeler. I hit him in the face with a brick when he tried to arrest me. Any more lip out of you, and you'll get the same. And then I thought about what would happen if I spoke. There'd be a row, and I'd end up battering the clown, and knowing my luck, I'd probably cop another 12, so I didn't say nothing. I just sat there, steaming. Veronica read us a bit of Laurie Lee, Cider with Rosie. Then we all had to describe a childhood memory. Then we all read our pieces aloud, except obviously Christopher Jenkins. Veronica read his. It was about his dad pinning a mouse down with a plastic tube, and the mouse running up the inside and jumping into his dad's face, and his dad damn near swallowed it, and we all damned near died laughing, except for Alan. He just scowled. Jealous boots. Veronica gave us our homework at the end of the class, 500 words on a parent. Class dismissed. I was excused my orderly tea-time servery duties on Thursday afternoons because I was in education. Torval filled in for me, so I went and collected my tea from the circle once I got back on the wing. It was nice not to be the one dishing the muck out for a change. Curry, apple pie, custard. I passed Christopher Jenkins's old cell as I headed back to mine, and I couldn't help imagining looking in, seeing him sitting on the bed, him seeing me and nodding cautiously, me nodding back just as carefully, and then me saying, brilliant story today, and then him moving his tongue inside his mouth, and then after a lot of trouble finally saying, thank you, and beaming as he spoke, and then me thinking, I was probably the first person to have said a nice word to him since he'd arrived. Yeah, that's what I thought. What the fuck was happening to me? What was I thinking? But I had. And because I was interested in him now and had to know, over the following days when I was in the Screws office cooking their breakfasts and that, by a combination of eavesdropping, sneaking a look at paperwork that was lying around, and asking sly wee questions, I got Christopher Jenkins' story. He was doing 4 years for downloading child pornography. Did it on the computer, at work, lost his job, lost his fiancée too. I know. How did somebody with his looks get a girl? But he did, or had, apparently. Anyway, she'd gone, ditto family, friends, home. When he got out, he'd have to start life from scratch. Somewhere no one knew him, and he'd be on the sex register. He'd be on the register for sex offenders for life. I actually felt a wee bit sorry for him by the time I got all of his story. Then a couple of classes after I found out his story, he asked if I'd lend him a roll of sellotape, which he said was unavailable on his wing, and I said I would, and I brought the roll to the next class, and the class after he returned it with an arrow. Our transactions were conducted in the toilet. Nobody saw. Technically, this was trafficking. Technically, we could have been charged. And after that, we were nodding acquaintances, though never in public, you understand, and certainly not in class. But when we were in the library over in education, where other cons wouldn't see, we'd exchange a few words. And of course, I never told him that I knew his story. And I took great care I was never too fucking familiar. I didn't want him getting ideas. Like I was his friend. I had a reputation to maintain. In the spring, Veronica entered everyone's stories, written over the course of the year, into a competition. It was summer when we heard back about them. I got a merit for my one about my maid Sol, and 10 quid. Christopher Jenkins came first and won 100 for a story called Help, about his father being shipwrecked. Alan had high hopes for his piece about an escaped lion on the Shankill Road, but he got nothing at all. He begged Veronica to phone the competition people and check there hadn't been a mistake. He banged on and on and on about it. All right, Veronica said finally, I'll go and phone, I'll be 5 minutes, don't do anything I wouldn't do. She walked out, the door closed. There's a dirty root in the room, said Alan, he's getting on my tits. The men on either side of Alan nodded, and if he doesn't fuck off right now, he's going to get it. Here was the deal. Christopher Jenkins either left or else he'd get it, because he'd refused to do what he'd been told. Not here. It'd be done on the wing. Boiling water mixed with sugar in a plastic half-pint mug chucked in his face, beating, slashing, stomping, something like that. Nasty, for sure. I've mates, good mates, continued Alan, and if the root doesn't fuck off right now, trust me, I'll just snap my fingers and they'll do what has to be done. Now, of course, Christopher Jenkins's wing was mostly roots, but as Christopher Jenkins knew, as Alan knew, as everyone in HMP Lone End knew, there were 1 or 2 fractious cons in the mix on the vulnerable prisoners wing who were there as an unsanctioned, unofficial punishment. These cons didn't like being with the roots, of course, and if they did kick off, well, the screws benefited doubly. A dirty root got it, and the screws could then punish the non-compliant prisoner. And what Alan was implying was that one of these belligerents was a mate of his and would do the necessary if Alan didn't get his way. Christ, I'd do what he says, said Reg. Despite his un-provo name, Reg was a provo who'd been brought back after a domestic when he threw his wife out the first-story window of their house. I'd go. Reg was the only one who ever talked to Christopher Jenkins in the class, which he was able to do because he was a Republican. And now Reg was telling him this. Christopher Jenkins knew he had to go. Gathered his papers and rushed from the room on his flat feet. That's better, said Alan. I can breathe easier now. The door opened. Veronica came in. I just saw Christopher Jenkins at the end of the landing talking to an officer, she said. He said he wasn't feeling well. He wants to be taken back to his wing. That's right, said Alan. He's got cancer. A few laughed. Root cancer. The laughter was louder. Even Reg and Beefy smiled. It's fatal, I hear, root cancer. He won't be coming back. Won't he? She said. No, and a good thing too, said Alan. I think I'll be the judge of that, Veronica said. We're 12 now, he replied. Much, much better than 13. I didn't know you were superstitious. You do now, he said. Veronica asked me to stay when class was finished, and as soon as everyone was out, she closed the door. She was wearing a silky dress, and her hair had a marvellous sheen, and we were alone, and the skin of her bare neck was white, freckled, lovely. How wonderful to lay my cheek there, I thought. This would have been the moment of my year, possibly my sentence, being in this room with her, a woman, alone. Who pushed him out, she said. Who? Christopher Jenkins. I said nothing, I just looked at her. You talked to him, not here, but in the library. I know you do, don't deny it. I know everything. So it wasn't you, and I know it wasn't Reg, because he's braver than you. He actually talks to Christopher in class. However, given his politics, I don't think Reg will tell me, so there's no point asking him. But you can talk to me, not a problem. So I'm asking you, who did it? This is a prison, I said. Yes, I am aware of that, said Veronica. Now who did it? Who put him out? I want his name. I can't tell you. Yes, you will. You don't do things like that, I said. Not in prison. It may be a jail, but that doesn't mean you have to act like it's one, she said. Oh, yes, you do. You know I can't say. No, I don't. Somebody put him out, and that man is not staying in my class. You will tell me who it was. Was it Alan? It was Alan, wasn't it? I tell you, and get a beating? No way. The door opened. Chalky, said the screw, escort's waiting. I expected better of you, she said. It's jail, I said. Don't expect better of anybody in jail. Expect worse. Don't worry, she said. In future, I will. Because she was only a teacher, Veronica couldn't put me on report for failing to obey an order, so she got a screw to do it for her. I'd been asked a question, and I refused to answer it, he said, which in the jail eyes is a crime. I said nothing at the adjudication. The governor gave me 7 days in the punishment block. While I was on the boards, I heard Christopher Jenkins got a bad beating and had to be sent to outside hospital. When I got back to F-Wing, I didn't go back to Veronica's class, but I couldn't, even if I'd wanted to. I was banned from education by the governor at my adjudication. He said that my attitude didn't warrant education. So that was that. It had been nice while it lasted, but now I was back on the wing on Thursday afternoons, cleaning, buffing, making up welcome packs for the new prisoners, back where I belonged, back in Wonderland, back doing my time.
So, 25 years working in prisons, isn't it? So it's 1991.
6 years in the maze.
That's right.
And then from 1997 to 2015 in McGambry. And then since then, I've worked in the working out unit, Hyde Bank, which is the old Young Offender Centre, and they sent me back to McGilligan last week.
So what's, I mean...
It's the money and the allure. It's the answer to the question.
The adulation, is
yeah.
Come on then. So was it something that you wanted to do? Was it something that just an opportunity that came your way and then you enjoyed the experience? But I mean, to stick at something like anything for 25 years is quite a commitment. So there must have been something that must have got to you somewhere.
The honest answer is, I had an absolutely terrible relationship with my father. My father had a terrible relationship with his father, Adolf, who was an Austro-Hungarian, Czech nationalist, living in Ireland in August 1914. Adolf is arrested by Dublin Metropolitan policemen about 2 weeks after war is declared in 1914. Gets sent to camp, aliens camp in Oldcastle. Doesn't return. His wife is pregnant with my father. He doesn't return until 1919. The war didn't end until 1919. It was only an armistice in 1918. He goes back to Dublin, to the slum they're living in, doesn't recognise his wife, and there's this 4-year-old child, my father, with whom he does not bond. And unconsciously, I absorbed all this as a child. And many years later, when I was asked to go and start working in the maze, I had a sense of complete and utter, I felt that this was inevitable. I thought to myself, I have been expecting this. I didn't think this in a logical, clear-cut way. I'm telling this, it was an intuitive feeling that I had. And obviously, I needed to go and work in prisons because I would be helping men to maintain contact with their sons and their children. It was some It was an act of reparation, psychic reparation, that connected to my past.
Wow.
The family past. That's really why, is the honest answer. And then when I looked at my father's papers, I found all this, I mean, their relationship was hideous, that his father, being in camp, being away for 5 years, was the most important thing in his life. In the sense that he didn't bond, and yeah, their relationship was a complete catastrophe.
Can you hear all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then curiously, Alannah was, I used to go and see my father in his lair in Dalkey, and he would always have Alannah's book on the front table, you see, and he'd go, that's a proper writer. That's if you really want to know about writing, have a look at Alannah's book. Yeah.
What's it called? Which one was it?
No, I can't imagine a father being that mean to a son, and you didn't live together for...
No. And then the other thing is I knew Alannah we had an editor called Julian Evans.
Yes.
And
we were published at the same time by Hamish Hamilton in London.
And then
our first novels.
You lived in Soho, and I knew lots of people in Soho who knew you. But I didn't know you. All I would get would be going to my father's house in Dalkey. Yes. That's a proper writer.
Didn't you live in the same place in London as well, in the same area?
We grew up as children in the same part of South London. Taken to the same playgrounds, the same horrible ponds on Wimbledon Common. That landscape.
We've scarred.
Yes.
We've actually never recovered.
These are satellites, right?
Yeah.
No, we're on the same escalator of life.
Okay.
See, there are some people who are on your escalator.
I'm definitely not.
You're on my escalator now. Yeah, we'll have you. Yeah.
All right.
When we did eventually meet with Kinsale Arts Week, it was like meeting an old friend. I mean, we had so much to come on.
Yeah.
So many friends in common. Carlo's father took it on himself to mentor me as a writer when I was starting out.
Yes.
And so we'd have these great sessions of advice being given, which was usually about not drinking. Eating vegetables. And,
Don't eat processed meat.
No.
Steer clear of white sugar.
All that stuff.
Yeah.
He was way
And you write better.
Yeah. I mean, he was a crank. Food crank.
Yeah.
Okay, so just taking it back a little bit, it's a work of fiction, but obviously it's inspired, is that the right word, by your time that you spent?
Well, the thing is that all the stuff in it is the stuff, the rules, the regulations, like, for instance, the idea that, I mean, only in a prison would they come up with this. So you've got some fractious cons, as they would term themselves. So you think, right, fuck you, I'm going to put you with the pedos, and that will destroy your reputation. So the idea that the prison system would think like that, and would want to hobble these men who are aggressive by putting them on the wing with the fun, so-called fun. Things like that you wouldn't know unless you were in the prison. And that's what, and Alan knows, and of course when the scaldings of the sex offenders takes place, it is those fractious cons who are being punished on the wing, the vulnerable prisons wing, to do the scaldings or the slashings. And the officers...
Did you keep notes?
I did. Every week I wrote a letter.
Because there's so many people's stories.
Yeah, I wrote a letter to my boss, so I've got about 1 million words of stuff.
Side stories.
It must have been hard to leave out actual events that you knew, and people. There must have been books in there that you met on a weekly basis,
But I was interested in organising, taking experience and organising it and structuring it and patterning it and sequencing it, and providing something that gave people 12 little moments told by the same person that connected, rather than a novel. I mean, it's very, very difficult to write about prison because it's, as I said, it's repetitive.
I think that one of the things that struck me as well was, I mean, obviously you get the sense where the system is brutal, but that there's no hell like other people, you know. My God, they are so. It's like the system allows people to be that evil with each other, and it encourages it. But those people are once that they have their own laws, their own punishments, and it's all about crime and punishment in there as well. You know, what you're allowed to do, what the rules are that they've made up themselves, separate from the system's rules and things. And you know, you really do get that feeling how oppressive.
But there's also incredible kindness. I mean, Chalky does give him the sellotape. He does meet him in the toilets. Yeah, and there's another story, Chums, he helps someone to make a matchstick Irish cottage.
And cigarettes to the drug addict.
So Chalky has his own principles, and Chalky wouldn't scold a sex offender. He wouldn't. He is violent, don't get me wrong, but he's got his own principles. He doesn't fall in with the general jail idea.
Was it Dostoevsky that said, I'm paraphrasing here, that you can judge a society on how they treat the prisoners?
Churchill.
They said it's Churchill, but it's actually...
It's from Dostoevsky.
Yeah.
Always steal from a good source.
But yeah, I mean, would you agree with that?
Our prisons are disgusting. And while we're on the subject, our prisons down here aren't very good either.
Okay. Just the prison system around the world.
Not very good. Although, there are people like John Lonergan, who is a saint. I mean, what he managed to stop going on at Mountjoy, which was violence being meted out to prisoners, was incredible. And he did stop it.
Just about the question on short stories, because I'm aware now, actually, we're actually out of time, so...
Fine.
You didn't get to do a question, did you? I think that's sort of like, I'll get you off that. But I just wanted to ask you a little bit about short stories. One of the things you said about short stories is that, once you've written a short story, you might as well have written a novel.
Yeah.
Which tells us about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, but at least with these, it is a sort of novel. But you could have taken any one of Alannah's stories and, just gone on for I mean, you've gone to the trouble of creating the characters and
maintaining this tension and...
Why do we write short stories?
Why do you write short stories?
What are we thinking?
They're easier to finish than a novel.
Okay, but it's the amount of thinking that goes into it is the same as a novel that you do.
I mean, in the beginning, Alannah said that some of the stories that she returned to were stories that were incomplete. But clearly you're unconscious. The cogs have been turning away, working overtime for the last 30 years. The mind does go on sorting and sifting and organising.
Definitely, yes.
And but to write a short story requires as much thought, not as much labour, but as much thought as writing a novel. I mean, you have to work it out. It might just take a sliver of time, but you need to know everything about the people and their lives.
Yeah, it becomes totally obsessive.
Obsess with them. In the same way that you need to know everything and be obsessed if you're writing a novel.
And did you go back and change any of those? Did you do some edits or add in little bits that you thought I would improve with this story?
Fairly radical.
Yeah.
And you sort of learn that you've got nothing to lose if you do that. If it's not working and it's unfinished, you might as well mess around with it. And now, of course, we have computers, we can keep numbered drafts, and you don't lose things the way you used to. So yeah, it's good to learn. You can be extreme, and you can put different endings on. You can kill off characters. You can do whatever you like, and nobody else is going to know. So,
if it's been published before, though, I mean, does that?
Oh, that we were talking about at Fiction at the Friary. Yeah, I felt I shouldn't change stories that had already...
Could you resist?
Yeah, I did, actually. I wanted to change the end of the Dogs of Inishere to make it rather more clear that they were a couple by the end. That they were not able to do anything because they were surrounded by copulating dogs on a very small island. I mean, what do you do? Like, knock on a cottage and say, could we have a double room this time, please? So, I didn't change the ending, and I'm quite glad now that I didn't. But,
I know that you're a believer of, writing is rewriting.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
have you ever been tempted, maybe in a second edition of making some edits to a work that's already been published?
I try to resist.
But have you done it?
No. No.
Okay.
But I mean, with something like this, what took me such a long time was the sequencing.
And to
So-
vary it, because it's
Yeah.
such a grey world.
Yeah.